The Galactic Combat Academy had seen many species walk through its reinforced titanium doors, but none quite like Maya Chen. She stood barely 5 feet tall, her dark hair tied back in a simple ponytail, wearing the standard-issue training uniform that seemed to hang loose on her compact frame. To the untrained eye, she looked fragile, delicate even. The Vorthan students whispered among themselves as she entered the sparring hall. Their crystalline blue skin shimmered with amusement, therefore arms gesturing dismissively. The Khazari delegation hissed softly through their scale lips, their serpentine necks swaying as they sized up the newcomer. Even the hulking Gorvok warriors, standing nearly 8 feet tall with their stone-like hide, seemed unimpressed. "Another Terran," muttered Zek Thornscale, the lead Khazari student. His voice carried the typical arrogance of someone who had never lost a match. "How quaint. I wonder how long this one will last before requesting a transfer to the engineering division." Maya heard every word. Her lips curved into a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Oh, this was going to be fun. Instructor Vexhai Stormclaw stood at the center of the training mat, his massive Gorvok frame casting a shadow across half the room. His voice boomed like thunder through the hall. "Today, we welcome a new student from the Terran Republic." Maya Chun stepped forward. Maya walked with casual confidence, her footsteps silent on the padded floor. The other students formed a circle around the sparring area, their conversations dying as anticipation filled the air. "Combat assessment begins with basic sparring protocols," Vexhai announced, his granite features showing no emotion. "Maya Chun, select your opponent for evaluation." The room fell silent. Every eye turned to the small human girl, standing in the center. The smart choice would be one of the smaller species. Maybe a Quellan, with their lightweight frames and emphasis on speed over strength. Perhaps even a mid-tier opponent like a Malt Hari. Maya's gaze swept across the assembled students before settling on the most imposing figure in the room. Korran Brutefist, the Academy's undefeated champion. 7 feet of pure Gorvok muscle, with fists like sledgehammers and a reputation for ending fights in under 30 seconds. "Him," Maya said, pointing directly at Korran. The silence stretched for exactly 3 heartbeats before erupting into chaos. Students from every species began talking at once, their voices creating a cacophony of disbelief, excitement, and barely contained laughter. The Vorthan's crystalline appendages chimed like wind bells as they gestured frantically. The Khazari hissed with what could only be described as predatory anticipation. Korran's massive jaw dropped open, revealing teeth like granite chips. "You cannot be serious," he rumbled, his voice carrying the weight of landslides. "Little Terran, I do not wish to harm you unnecessarily." Maya's smile widened, showing perfectly white human teeth. "How thoughtful of you, big guy. Don't worry, though. I'll try to go easy on you, too." The sarcasm in her voice was so thick, you could cut it with a plasma blade. Several students actually stepped back, sensing something dangerous in the air. Instructor Vexhai's eyes narrowed as he studied the human girl more carefully. "Very well," Vexhai announced, raising one massive hand. "Standard sparring rules apply. No lethal force, no permanent damage. Match ends when one opponent yields or cannot continue. Fighters, take your positions." Korran lumbered to his corner of the mat, his footsteps making the floor vibrate. He performed the traditional Gorvok war stance, arms spread wide, fists clenched, looking like a mountain preparing for battle. The display was meant to intimidate, and it worked on everyone present. Everyone except Maya. She walked to her corner with the same casual confidence, rolling her shoulders and stretching her neck. No fancy stances, no intimidation displays. She just stood there, loose and relaxed, like she was waiting for a bus. "Begin!" Vexhai commanded. Korran charged forward like a freight train made of stone and fury. His massive fists swung in devastating arcs, each punch capable of shattering concrete. The air whistled with the force of his attacks. It was beautiful in its brutality, a perfect display of Gorvok combat prowess. Maya simply wasn't there anymore. She slipped past his first punch like smoke, her body moving with fluid grace. Korran's second swing missed by inches as she ducked low, her movements economical and precise. The third punch actually passed through the space where her head had been a microsecond earlier. "Stand still, small one," Korran bellowed, frustration creeping into his voice. "Fight with honor, not cowardice." Maya laughed, actually laughed, as she danced away from another crushing blow. "Oh, I'm fighting, big guy. You're just swinging at shadows." The watching students were mesmerized. This wasn't how combat was supposed to work. Raw strength and power were the foundations of galactic martial arts. Size, mass, and force-determined victory. Yet here was this tiny human girl, making their champion look like he was fighting underwater. Korran's attacks became more desperate, more wild. His massive arms windmilled through empty air as Maya continued her deadly dance. She was always exactly where he wasn't, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy physics. "Impossible," whispered Zek Thornscale, his scaled features showing genuine confusion. "She moves like liquid mercury." "It's not natural," added Lyra Crystalsong, one of the Vorthan students. Her 4 arms trembled with nervous energy. No species should be that agile. But Maya was just getting started. The moment came when Korran overextended himself, putting too much power into a devastating haymaker that could have pulverized titanium. As his massive fist sailed harmlessly past her ear, Maya stepped inside his guard like she owned the space. What happened next would be talked about in hushed whispers throughout the academy for years to come. Maya's hand shot out and grabbed Korran by the throat. Not aggressively, not violently. Almost gently, really. Her fingers wrapped around his thick neck with the casual confidence of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Korran's eyes went wide with shock. In all his years of combat, in all his victories, no opponent had ever gotten close enough to touch his neck. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. "Here's the thing about Gorvok anatomy," Maya said conversationally, her voice perfectly calm despite having her hand around the throat of a creature that could bench press a hover car. "Your vocal cords are connected to a nerve cluster right about here." She pressed slightly with her thumb. Korran's voice box seized up completely. No sound emerged from his massive jaw except a tiny, pathetic wheeze. "And your balance center," Maya continued, shifting her grip slightly, "is connected to pressure points right along here." Korran's legs suddenly forgot how to support his massive frame. He swayed like a drunk tree in a hurricane. "But the really interesting part," Maya said, her voice taking on an almost educational tone, "is how your species' entire nervous system has this one tiny little weakness, right?" She pressed with her pinky finger. Korran's entire body locked up like someone had hit his off switch. His massive frame stood frozen, every muscle rigid with involuntary tension. His eyes darted frantically, the only part of him still capable of movement. The watching students stood in stunned silence. This wasn't possible. It couldn't be happening. Korran Brute Fist, the unstoppable champion, was completely helpless in the grip of a human girl who weighed less than his left arm. Maya leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried across the entire silent hall. "You know what the funny thing is about us Terrans? We don't actually call our planet Earth because it's covered in dirt." She paused for dramatic effect, her smile growing wider. "We call it Earth because everything else in the galaxy is soft." With casual ease, she shifted her grip from Korran's throat to his shoulder. Her fingers found a precise junction where his massive collarbone met his shoulder joint. With surgical precision, she applied pressure to exactly the right spot. The crack echoed through the hall like a gunshot. Korran's paralysis broke as pain flooded his system. He collapsed to the mat, clutching his shoulder and making sounds that no Gorvok warrior should ever make in public. His collarbone hadn't been broken, exactly. It had been dislocated so cleanly that the bones separated without damage, leaving him in agony but without permanent injury. Maya straightened up, brushing imaginary dust off her uniform. She looked around the circle of shocked faces, her expression mild and pleasant. "Medical attention for the big guy," she said cheerfully to Instructor Vex High. "Nothing permanent, but that's going to hurt for a while." The instructor stared at her with something approaching awe. In 40 years of teaching combat, he had never seen anything like what just happened. Maya had taken down the Academy's champion using techniques he didn't even recognize, with a level of anatomical knowledge that bordered on terrifying. How? Vexai asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Maya's smile turned predatory. You know what they say about humans. Instructor, we're the species that looked at every other creature on our planet and asked, but can we eat it? Turns out, when you spend a few 100,000 years as persistence hunters, you get really good at knowing exactly how other species are put together. She walked toward the exit, pausing only to look back at the assembled students. Fear radiated from every species present. The Vorthan's crystalline skin had gone pale. The Khazari were pressed against the walls like they were trying to disappear. Even the other Gorvok students looked ready to bolt. Oh, and for future reference, Maya added casually, on my planet, what we just did, that wasn't combat. That was me being nice. The door sealed behind her with a soft hiss, leaving behind a hall full of students who were just beginning to understand why humans were classified as a Deathworld species. Instructor Vexai looked down at Korran, who was still whimpering on the mat, while medical drones attended to his shoulder. The champion's eyes held a look that Vexai had never seen before in a Gorvok warrior. Terror. Pure, unfiltered terror. Attention, all students, Vexai announced, his voice carrying a new note of respect. Class is dismissed. Report to your dormitories and reflect on what you have witnessed today. As the students filed out in stunned silence, Vexai activated his personal communicator. The Academy administration needed to know immediately. They had been worried about how to properly evaluate human combat capabilities. That concern had just become laughably irrelevant. The real question now was how to keep the other students from requesting immediate transfers to different schools. Maya-chan had just redefined what everyone thought they knew about combat effectiveness. And according to her file, she was considered average by Terran standards. The galaxy was about to get a very rude awakening about exactly what it meant to evolve on a death world. Hashtag part 2, reputation spreads. News traveled fast in the Galactic Combat Academy. By the next morning, every student, instructor, and maintenance drone knew about the human girl who had dismantled Korran Brutefist like he was made of cheap plastic. The story grew with each telling, but the medical reports provided undeniable proof that something extraordinary had happened. Maya walked into the cafeteria to find the entire space had gone silent. Hundreds of students from dozens of species stopped eating, stopped talking, stopped breathing. Every eye tracked her movement as she grabbed a tray and headed for the food dispensers. Well, she muttered to herself, this isn't awkward at all. The automated food systems recognized her biometric signature and began dispensing a standard Terran meal. Synthetic proteins, carbohydrate compounds, and vitamin supplements designed to keep humans functioning at peak efficiency. It looked like military rations and probably tasted worse. Maya found an empty table in the center of the cafeteria and sat down with her back to the room. She could feel the stares boring into her skull like laser beams. The silence stretched on, broken only by the quiet hum of ventilation systems and the occasional nervous cough. You know, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear, staring is considered rude on most civilized worlds. The comment broke the spell. Conversations resumed in hushed whispers, but the tension remained thick enough to cut with a blade. Maya ate her terrible food and pretended not to notice the way entire tables of students got up and left whenever she looked in their direction. She was halfway through her meal when someone finally worked up the courage to approach. Maya looked up to see a Quellan student standing nervously beside her table. The diminutive humanoid's butterfly-like wings were folded tight against her back, a clear sign of anxiety among her people. Excuse me, the Quellan said in accented standard Galactic. I am Pip Flutterby. I wanted to thank you. Maya raised an eyebrow. Thank me? For what exactly? Pip's wings twitched with nervous energy. Korran has been a bully since arriving at the Academy. Many of us smaller species have suffered his training exercises. What you did yesterday, it showed that size is not everything. A genuine smile crossed Maya's face, the first real one she'd shown since arriving at the Academy. Pip, that's a lovely sentiment, but you've got it backwards. Size absolutely matters in combat. So does strength, reach, mass, bone density, muscle fiber composition, and about 50 other physical factors. Pip's face fell. Then how did you defeat him so easily? Maya gestured for Quellan to sit down around the cafeteria. Students leaned in to hear her answer because, Maya said, taking another bite of her awful food, combat isn't just about physical capability. It's about knowledge, preparation, and understanding your opponent better than they understand themselves. I spent exactly 30 seconds watching Korran move, and I knew everything I needed to know about how to take him down. 30 seconds? Pip's voice squeaked with disbelief. Gait analysis, muscle tension patterns, balance distribution, breathing rhythm, even the way he held his shoulders. Every species has tells, biological markers that reveal their capabilities and limitations. Gorvaks are incredibly strong, but their nervous system has 3 major vulnerability points that evolved as side effects of their enhanced bone density. Maya paused to drink from her water bulb, aware that half the cafeteria was now openly listening to her lecture. The thing about humans, she continued, is that we're generalists. We're not the strongest or the fastest or the most durable, but we're very, very good at pattern recognition and adaptive problem solving. Give us enough data, and we can figure out how to take down just about anything. A new voice cut through the conversation. Fascinating theory, Terran. Maya looked up to see Zek Thornscale approaching, flanked by 2 other Khazari students. The reptilian humanoids moved with predatory grace, their scales shimmering with aggressive patterns. Zek, Maya said pleasantly, come to test a theory? The Khazari's forked tongue flicked out, tasting the air. Perhaps. Your performance yesterday was impressive, but Korran is not the only formidable fighter in this academy. True, Maya agreed, finishing her meal. He's just the biggest. Zek's scale features twisted into what might have been a smile. Size, as you just explained, is not everything. My people are renowned for speed, agility, and tactical intelligence. We do not rely on brute force. Maya stood up, clearing her tray. Also true, Khazari combat doctrine emphasizes rapid strikes to vital areas, using natural weapons and enhanced reflexes to overwhelm opponents before they can mount an effective defense. The cafeteria had gone silent again. This conversation was heading somewhere dangerous, and everyone could feel it. You seem well informed about our capabilities, Zek noted, his voice carrying a subtle threat. Standard xenobiology coursework. Maya replied with a shrug. Though I'll admit, I find the Khazari approach particularly interesting from a tactical perspective. Oh! Zek moved closer, his companions flanking him. And why is that? Maya's smile took on a predatory edge. Because your entire fighting style is based on a fundamental misunderstanding of how Terran combat psychology works. The words hit the cafeteria like a physical blow. Students from every species present suddenly found themselves holding their breath. Zek's scales flushed with angry colors. Explain, he hissed. Gladly, Maya said, her voice taking on that same casual, educational tone she'd used with Korran. Khazari combat doctrine assumes that overwhelming speed and aggression will prevent your opponent from adapting to your attack patterns. It works great against most species, because they need time to process new information and formulate responses. She took a step closer to Zek, closing the distance between them. But humans evolved as persistence hunters on a world where everything wanted to kill us. We don't need time to adapt. We do it automatically, constantly, without conscious thought. Your speed and aggression actually work against you when fighting us, because they provide us with more data points to analyze. Zek's neck frill expanded with agitation. You speak as if you have already defeated me. Oh, I have, Maya said matter-of-factly. The moment you walked over here with your little intimidation display, I knew exactly how you'd attack, what your preferred targets would be, and which of your natural weapons you'd rely on. Khazari males of your age group have 17 distinct attack patterns, and you've already telegraphed which variant you favor. The Khazari student's eyes widened with shock and rage. Impossible. Your left shoulder sits 2 millimeters higher than your right, indicating a preference for leading with that side. Your tail positioning shows you favor lateral strikes over vertical ones. The way you hold your claws suggests you've trained extensively with the traditional 7-strike combination favored by the second house combat schools. And the pheromone markers you're unconsciously releasing indicate your planning to initiate combat within the next 47 seconds. Maya's voice never rose above a conversational tone, but every word hit like a sledgehammer. Around the cafeteria, students were backing away from the confrontation, sensing impending violence. "Shall I continue?" Maya asked pleasantly. "Or would you prefer I just skip to the part where I explain exactly how I counter each of your attacks?" Zek's control finally snapped. With a hissing war cry, he launched himself forward in a perfect display of Kazari combat prowess. His claws extended, his tail whipped around for a devastating side strike, and his fangs gleamed with deadly intent. Maya sidestepped the attack so casually that it looked choreographed. Zek's momentum carried him past her, his claws raking through empty air. Before he could recover, Maya's hand shot out and grabbed his tail mid-swing. With surgical precision, she applied pressure to a specific point near the base. Zek's entire body seized up as paralysis flooded his nervous system. He collapsed to the floor, twitching helplessly as his own natural weapons turned against him. Kazari physiology, Maya explained to a horrified audience, includes a nerve cluster at the base of the tail that controls motor function for the entire posterior skeletal structure. Apply pressure to the right spot, and their own nervous system does the work for you. She released Zek's tail and stepped back. The Kazari student lay on the floor, gasping and unable to coordinate his movements. "Medical assistance for our friend here," Maya called out. "Nothing permanent, but he's going to need about an hour for his nervous system to reset." The other two Kazari students helped their leader to his feet, supporting his weight as feeling slowly returned to his limbs. They retreated without a word, their scales showing the pale colors of defeat and humiliation. Maya looked around the cafeteria, taking in the faces of stunned students from dozens of species. Fear, awe, and something approaching worship stared back at her. "Anyone else want to test a theory?" she asked cheerfully. Silence greeted her question. Absolute, total silence. "Excellent," Maya said, gathering her things. "In that case, I'll see you all in afternoon combat drills. Should be fun." She walked out of the cafeteria, leaving behind a room full of students who were rapidly coming to understand a fundamental truth about the galaxy. Humans weren't just another species. They were apex predators who had evolved to kill everything else on their planet, and they were very, very good at it. Instructor Vexai found Maya in the Academy's observation deck later that afternoon. She was sitting alone, watching the stars whirl by through the massive viewport. "The administration is concerned," he said without preamble. Maya didn't look away from the stars. "I imagine they are. Enrollment applications are down 60% since yesterday. Parents are pulling their children from the academy. 3 separate species have lodged formal complaints about unsafe conditions.